Which ammunition should you use in different situations? Arrows, darts, bolts, even melee weapons like the Tentacle whip and Scythe are sometimes not worth using due to their cost. Using higher tier ammo costs more, and for that cost to be worth paying, you need to make an equivalent or higher amount more GP from the monster you are fighting to make it worth using. The raw DPS is not always the only factor, as if the better ammunition is helping you secure kills on a boss, or increasing your kill trips, the ammunition is helping you more than just speeding up your kills. A good example of this is Inferno. If Dragon Darts are the difference maker, you should absolutely be using them. It's also worth keeping in mind killing a boss faster means you are eating less and using less stat boosting potions, although the difference this makes is pretty small. Keep in mind this video is focused on making more profit only. When pet hunting, it's almost always best to use your absolute most powerful weapon at cost, as finishing a pet grind faster means you can get back to more optimal moneymakers. This video is going to go over each of my main higher end ammo upgrades and is aimed at players capable of bossing. If you're training early ranged, for example, and wondering whether you should use bone bolts or steel darts, you're going to need to calculate that for yourself. Also for my numbers, I will be assuming max stats using the best available potion and prayer, as well as an assembler for the ranged weapons. The way I'll be calculating this value is really simple, but requires some basic algebra. You take X, which is our profit per hour at any given location, multiply it by Y, which is our DPS increase in decimal form, and then if this number is greater than or equal to your supply cost increase, it is generating you more money than it loses. Let's start with darts, as this is a heavily discussed upgrade order. Keep in mind a pipe even before darts costs 400k GP an hour to use just in scale cost. Adamant darts add only 45k GP an hour cost to use and are our baseline. Rune darts cost just under 600k GP an hour to use, and dragon darts cost just under 1.5 mil GP an hour to use. These are just what the darts add on their own. The scale cost on its own adds an extra 400k GP an hour to the cost. Adamant darts have plus 10 range strength, rune darts have plus 14 range strength, and dragon darts have plus 20 range strength, as well as each upgrade having a small ranged accuracy bonus. Range strength determines your max hit, so these upgrades are quite large for your DPS. Each dart upgrade typically gives you one extra max hit, which equates to roughly 4% DPS. Each monster has different defense levels. These upgrades matter more when a monster has a high defense, but you usually are piping low defense monsters. Because the toxic blowpipe fires every 2 ticks, you lose darts much more quickly than other ranged weapons. I would bet this is going to be surprising for a lot of people, but for a 4% DPS increase to be worth using, you need to be making over 10 mil GP an hour. You technically break even on dart cost on paper at just over 12 mil GP an hour, but I want to leave grace for supplies saved by having better DPS. The only place you can make this much that I know of is the Theater of Blood, which is up to 11 mil GP an hour with perfect trios and Nightmare, which you don't even use pipe for. There are very few monsters where your DPS is getting a larger increase than 4%. Skeletal Mystics and Chambers of Xerix are one of the few monsters you pipe with high defense, but it's still only a 5% increase in DPS versus 4. You should almost always be using Adamant darts instead of Rune. Where does that leave Dragon darts? Again, these are another max hit, but at the cost of an extra 1 mil GP an hour over Rune darts. Basically, Dragon darts are only for pet hunters or people going for boss KC high scores. As for these to make you more money than you lose, you would need to make over 20 mil GP an hour, which is unobtainable from any source that I know of. If you're using Dragon darts, you most likely are also a person that drinks sand fuse instead of prayer potions and brings a stack of purple sweets everywhere, as money realistically shouldn't matter to you anymore at that point. Let's move on to bolts. I often see people asking if they should be using regular ruby/diamond bolts or dragon bolts. Dragon bolts are a massive upgrade with plus 17 range strength over diamond and plus 19 range strength over ruby. At most dragons, these equate to over 10% more DPS than standard bolts, providing about a plus 7 to your max hit. Because you lose less ammo an hour than with a pipe because you shoot slower, these are almost always worth using. You lose about 200 bolts an hour on average, which means with regular bolts, your cost would be about 40k GP an hour, and with dragon bolts, this cost would go up to about 200k GP an hour. This means you need to be making about 1.5 mil GP an hour for dragon bolts to be worth using over regular ones. So you definitely should be using these at Brutal Black Dragons and Vorkath. At King Black Dragon, it's almost questionable, but if you're killing him, you're probably just after the pet, so just use your best bolts. I also tested Amethyst bolts. These are cheaper than even the standard enchanted bolts and provide plus 10 range strength over diamond bolts. Against monsters with lower defense and health, where neither the diamond bolts effect nor the ruby's effect will really be helping you, Amethyst is not only cheaper but more powerful. If you're making below 1 mil GP an hour, these may be worth using. Think places like skeletal wyverns, for example. What about when using an armadillo crossbow against non-dragons? It's still almost exactly a 10% DPS increase using dragon bolts over regular, so the rule still stands. If you can make an average of over 1.5 mil GP an hour, you should be using dragon bolts. For all of you twisted bow users, how about arrows? Should you use amethyst or dragon arrows? Basically, you should always be using dragon arrows. These are about a 4% DPS upgrade and only cost 140k GP an hour versus amethyst arrows, which are 40k GP an hour to use. You technically need to be making about 2 mil GP an hour in order for dragon arrows to be worth using, but realistically, where are you using a T-bow where you aren't making at least that much, if not more? The only place you should use amethyst arrows that I can think of is Zulrah, as your damage is capped at 50 regardless, and better arrows will barely increase your DPS. How about the Tentacle Whip? Should you be using that for things like Slayer? The Tentacle Whip costs a bit less than a blowpipe with adamant darts to use. Typically, this is only 1 to 4% DPS over a regular whip, increasing the higher the enemy's defense, usually around 2% DPS average. But it also poisons enemies. For a 2% DPS increase to be worth using, you need to literally make 20 mil GP an hour. At its very best, at a 4% DPS increase, you need to make 10 mil GP an hour. The Tent Whip is important so you can poison the purple ticks at Verzik in the theater, so its use case is obvious there. Normally, I would probably just save up for a Rapier or Scythe before using a Tentacle Whip. What about that Scythe? Currently, this costs almost 1300 GP a swing, or 1.6 mil GP an hour to use. Nearly the cost of Dragon Darts from a blowpipe. Now, the reason this is still worth using is that the DPS upgrade is over a 25% DPS increase against a Blade of Saildor in most cases. DPS increases higher when monsters have reduced defense, so if you are throwing in Dragon Warhammer specs, it's even better. This means you need to make about 6 mil GP an hour for this upgrade to be worth using over Saildor. This means it 100% is worth using at Theater Blood and Nightmare. In Chambers vs. Ulm, the Scythe is only 10% more DPS than a Lance, so it's not worth using there if all you want is profit. If you are hunting the dust or kits in challenge mode or after the pet, it's probably worth using at a loss just to get those pets and items faster. I'll also mention the stabs. The regular Trident costs 450k GP an hour to use, where the Toxic Trident costs 750k GP an hour to use. The Trident of the Swamp is about a 15% DPS increase due to it increasing your max hit by about 4, and it can venom your target. For that 300k GP an hour extra to be worth it, you need to be making at least 2 mil GP an hour, which means it's almost always worth using the Trident of the Swamp instead. The Sanguine SD staff only raises your max hit by 1 over the Trident of the Swamp, making it only about 2.5% more DPS, but it heals you, so it's really hard to determine its true worth. It is much more expensive to use at about 1.8 mil GP an hour. In a use case like Group Cox, where realistically you shouldn't need that extra healing in most cases, I would probably still use the Trident. In a place like the theater or solo Cox, the extra healing could really be a difference maker. So it's likely worth using in these situations. And that's about it for the different ammunitions in RuneScape. Hopefully this video cleared up any confusion surrounding what ammo to use in what situation. Leave a like if you liked the video, and or subscribe. Thanks guys.